Hi, it's Frenchy Betts. Welcome back to another video. Today's video, we got the top 10 biggest draft disappointments from the 2023 season. If you like these videos, be sure to like and subscribe. I'll be here all off season long, covering the draft, any big news, and getting ready for next season already. So let's jump into it. Starting with the biggest draft disappointment. Austin Ekeler, drafted at number 4 overall. PPR, he might have even went higher, but ADP of 4. Started with a bang with 26 points in week 1 and looked great. Then missed 4 weeks. And 9 of his 13 games played, he had less than 12 points after that. Finished as the running back 26 overall and 21st in points per game. All year, including week 1, only had 5 weeks as a top 12 running back and 8 as a top 24 running back, or worse than a top 24 running back. It's almost 29 years old, getting up there for running back age. Got an expiring contract. Who knows where he's going to go, but he's definitely not going to be getting the lion's share of the workload. He'll probably be a committee back somewhere. Definitely not going to get the money that he wanted. So I'm very worried about Ekeler going forward. Something crazy would have to happen on where he goes with no competition. And even then, I wouldn't be very confident with him going into next year. So, up next, we got Justin Jefferson as a draft disappointment. He wasn't bad when he played, but you didn't have him for 6 weeks due to injury, and finished as the wide receiver 33, but was wide receiver 5 in points per game. Just didn't have him all year, and that's huge. As a top 3 pick and the number 1 overall in many leagues, just hurt not having him for so long. And 3 or 4 weeks at less than 9 points when he did come back in the fantasy playoffs. So between the start of the season not having him and then not really performing in the playoffs, it was had to be a pretty big disappointment. He's still an elite, one of the, not going to argue, top 3 receivers in the league when he's healthy, and hopefully Kirk Cousins re-signs with Minnesota. I think that's the ideal situation for Justin Jefferson and really all of Minnesota's pass catchers and offense in general. So not worried at all about him going forward. Next, another huge draft disappointment. Guy had high hopes for. Tony Pollard, ADP of 13.5, so early second round, and was the 5th running back off the board. He was running back 23 in points per game. He had 8 weeks outside of the top 24 running backs and only 2 top 10 finishes. Drafted in the early second, backfield to himself. Just not the season that anyone projected, and a lot of that had to do with the touchdowns. He had a ton of carries inside the 5 and only had a couple touchdowns on those. So that really killed his production there. So on an expiring contract, knows if he's going to resign in Dallas or where he'll go. Definitely worried about him going forward, but it might be better for him to not have to be the workhorse. I mean, he was way better when Zeke was there, and Zeke carried the bulk of the load, and he was just there for the big explosive plays. So where he goes, and probably won't get the same workload even if he stays in Dallas, but all dependent on what team he's playing for. And if he does stay in Dallas, if I'm projecting to bring someone else in, just because it didn't really work out with him as the only guy there. So on to the next one, and People are going to try and battle me on this one, but just hear me out. Patrick Mahomes, ADP of 15 and a quarterback 1 off the board. Finished as a quarterback 8 overall, so that's not terrible. Only 7 spots below where he was projected, but he was quarterback 11 points per game. Taking a quarterback in the early second round, they have to hit. They have to be a top 3 guy, far and away better than the rest of the pack. Like last year, the top 3 guys were way better than the fourth quarterback. Well, there's too many other guys that going around the same area that would have been way more value. Taking Dak later, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy really late or off the waivers in a lot of leagues, and all three of those all three of those guys outscored Mahomes. So they would have been much better overall for your fantasy team taking one of those guys late and taking someone else with your second round pick or late first round pick, depending where you took Mahomes. So it's taking a quarterback top 3 rounds is just not the best strategy, especially like a guy in Mahomes' case where he doesn't run a ton. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Lamar, you can justify it a little bit more because they have a solid floor to them with their rushing upside, but I just won't be. I don't know if I'll ever have Mahomes on another fantasy team unless he starts going in the 4th, 5th round. But for a guy that doesn't run that much, there's no chance I'm taking him in the top 3 rounds. Obviously, it's Mahomes, and he's still a great player. I'm not worried about him at all, but still going to be drafted too high next year for me to take him. Up next, we got Cooper Kupp. ADP at 19, was wide receiver 9 off the board, and finished as receiver 40 in total points. Receiver 24 in points per game, so not terrible, but still 24 in points per game, and he was taken as the 9th receiver. And a lot of that had to do with the rookie taking over. Puka took over as the number 1 receiver. Cooper Kupp is 6 of his 12 weeks that he played, he was outside of receiver 36, and he's still a good receiver, but I think his elite days are done. Between his age and starting to deal with injuries now, and got a young next year, second year guy that looked great. I just don't see Cooper Kupp coming back to the elite fantasy guy that he was. I'm slightly worried about him. How much longer is Stafford going to be there? Puka's the alpha going forward. Kupp's getting older and dealing with injuries, so I am a little bit worried about Cooper Kupp. But if he can stay healthy, I think he'd be a good receiver too. Obviously, all this is dependent on what happens in the offseason, but he's still a good receiver, just not the number 1 guy like we saw the last couple of years. Moving on, Garrett Wilson, ADP of 22 and wide receiver 10 off the board. Finished as wide receiver 33 in points per game. He's still a great receiver with great talent, but the Jets got to get a quarterback. If Rodgers can come back from his Achilles injury and even be 75% of what he was, Garrett Wilson will be great. Borderline elite. We see what Rodgers did with Davante Adams in years past, but when you got Zach Wilson and those type of quarterbacks throwing the ball all year, it's tough to put up big numbers. So I'm not worried at all. If they have a quarterback, whether it's Rodgers or he can't go and they draft someone, anyone would be better than what they were putting out there. So as long as it's not Zach Wilson throwing it to him, I'm good with Garrett Wilson. On to the next one, DK Metcalf. This one's more of a disappointment for myself and what I had projected for him this year. he wasn't that far off of what he was drafted. He finished as receiver 21, was drafted as 13 in the late third. So not a terrible pick, just not what I had projected. I had really high hopes, and I had him easily being a top 10 guy, and obviously it didn't happen. Got elite talent still, size, speed, red zone guy. But Geno came back down to earth this year and obviously caused a huge drop into DK's numbers. And so I'm slightly worried. Geno came back down to earth, and he's still got elite talent. Lockett's getting older, so I don't see him as much of a threat anymore. Just going to be him and JSN. Will still be good for fantasy, but I don't see him ever really being a top 10 guy unless they hit on a quarterback and they get someone like a Justin Herbert caliber guy in the draft for in a couple years. Ramondre Stevenson is up next, drafted at 35 and the running back 10. Finished as running back 35, 27th in points per game. I had a huge year projected for Ramondre. Zeke cut into that workload quite a bit. I thought he would easily finish top 10, maybe even squeak into the top 5. But Zeke looked like he had some juice at times throughout the year. So he cut into the workload, and obviously Ramondre had an injury, so that doesn't help your fantasy team at all. He was very boomer bust. He was either a top 15 running back or outside the top 32 and most of the weeks throughout the season. And then again, to miss the last 5 games of the season. So I'm slightly worried about Ramondre. I still like the talent, but what's the quarterback situation with the Patriots? Will the offense even be somewhat competent next year? Obviously, going to have a new quarterback. So we'll have to see what that is. Whether it's a veteran or they take Marvin Harrison at 3, or they decide to go quarterback at 3. But either way, going to have a different quarterback. So then does Zeke resign? Or they bring anyone else in to compete with him? All those factors are going to a lot to be determined with Ramondre. Up next, Jonathan Taylor. I told you guys not to draft him. All pre-draft process, don't take Jonathan Taylor. The ADP of 35 and running back 11 off the board, finished as running back 33. So not great. Missed 7 games, 4 of them to start the season. Didn't play in over 50% of the snaps until week 8 because he was recovering from that injury. Was pretty good for the most part when he played, only having 2 single-digit fantasy games, and one of them being week 5, his first game back, where he only played 15% of the snaps. So, again, I'm not worried at all going forward. I think this Colts offense is going to be pretty good, especially with Anthony Richardson next year. Hopefully he can stay healthy. I think they'll be a high-flying, fast offense, and I'll be very high on Jonathan Taylor next year. Probably be running back 2 behind CMC. Maybe even take over CMC as a number 1. I wouldn't be surprised. Injury was the only reason I didn't want any part of him this year, and came to fruition. I mean, drafted him in the 3rd round and didn't even get a top 24 running back, barely a top 36 running back. So, but he'll be back next year and good. And the last one we're going to talk about today, T. Higgins. ADP of 45, which was receiver 18, and he finished at wide receiver 49, which was behind his teammate Tyler Boyd, also Ja'Marr Chase. Obviously, star quarterback and Joe Burrow going down doesn't help, but overall, he just wasn't good this year at all. Even when Burrow was playing, he wasn't good. He missed 5 games. 6 out of his 12 games that he played in were single digits in full PPR scoring. That is just brutal. Only finished as a top 36 receiver 4 times all year. Drafted this guy in the 4th round and only got a top 3 or receiver 3 4 times all year. So T. Higgins, another guy. We'll have to see if he goes to a new team, if he resigns with the Bengals, where he goes. So it's hard to say really if I'm worried or not about him, because it all depends on where he goes. Because I do think he's a talented receiver, and it just depends on where he goes and what that offense looks like. If he goes to a bad offense like the Patriots were this year, then I'm not going to be excited for him. But if he goes the Chargers, somewhere where they have a more competent offense and throw the ball, I like T. Higgins. So that's all I got for today. Having another video out next week, and I'm working on something currently. Hopefully next week I'll be able to present that to you guys. So that's it. Leave a like. I'll catch you guys next time.